I'm Jake Colvin with the Global Innovation Forum, and we're here today to talk about whether global markets are worth the hassle. Just a little bit about the Global Innovation Forum. It's an effort to connect entrepreneurs with corporations and government officials to explore the opportunities and challenges associated with exploring international markets. So our goals are to emphasize the opportunity that exists to go global, to identify the challenges that prevent companies and startups from going global, and to explore how governments can make all of our global journeys easier. One of the wonderful things that the internet does is it democratizes access to the global marketplace, and so startups can be global from day one. The suit that I'm wearing today is from a company called Black Hotel. Based up in New York, it's an 8-person team. They manufacture out of Shanghai, and in their first full year of operation, they get exported to over 70 countries around the world. So sure, what's our suit? It's this wonderful little story that wouldn't have been possible even a couple of years ago. But there are still a number of challenges to accessing global markets, and some of them are cultural or structural, but many of them are the result of government policies. So some of those government policies are terrible memories. Some of those government policies are deliberate, but some of those part of the problem is that policies that are in place were maybe not designed for the digital age, or designed or with the expectation that some of the new stakeholders would be participating in global markets. One good example of this is we had a forum in London a couple of months ago with the Level 39 incubator. It's a fintech incubator. We met a woman named Bethany who is the founder and CEO of a company called Technology Will Save Us. They build gadget kits, so you could build a handheld video game system and then program it. They make everything in East London. They export about 50% of it to the United States. But one of their first international shipments, major international shipments, was to the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and it got stuck in customs because the tariff codes that applied to the product changed during the time the shipment was in process. Now that's an information problem, and that's solvable. But for someone like Bethany, who doesn't have a general counsel or a compliance officer, they doubt they're really accountable. And that's the sort of thing that government can address. I think it's easy to be dismissive of governments, but policymakers can make it easier or harder, or otherwise put the thumb on the scale of the playing field when it comes to enabling companies and startups to go global. There are all sorts of things, from trade agreements to privacy policies to regulation of the digital economy to IP that impact the ability of all of us to go on a global journey. So with that, we have a great group of discussants here to identify the opportunity, to identify the challenges, and then talk about how governments can overcome. And I wanted to start in the middle with Kavita, who's the founder and CEO of Fenugreen, a startup that's based in Maryland. I'm going to her describe the product that she produces. But just to brag on her for a second, her and her co-founder were featured on Oprah. They received an award from Richard Branson at the Global Entrepreneurship Congress. And they created this juggernaut that's gone global very quickly. And so what I wanted to ask is if you could maybe describe your experience engaging in international markets. My experience is that startups don't always think they're going to be global from day one. So what is your journey like?
Sure. Well, my story is really the story of a startup that went global totally by accident. I started about 3 years ago with a little stall at the local farmers market down the street. And at that point, I had already tried and failed for years to take my invention to the world. And this is actually it. It's really simple. It's a piece of paper that's infused with organic spices. So if you just took this sheet and you dropped it into a refrigerator drawer or a fruit bowl or anywhere where you keep fresh fruits and vegetables, it would keep everything in there fresh for 2 to 4 times longer. Now, if you've ever gone home and opened your fridge and seen moldy strawberries or a bag of soggy spinach, you personally know how frustrating and expensive and disgusting food spoilage can be.
Literally every time.
It's more common than you would think. But because fresh paper is so simple and low cost, in addition to being used by consumers and people like you and me, it can actually be used by large-scale growers and producers, as well as in the developing world. And so ever since I first started working on this, which was for most of my life, I really wanted to get this idea to people in India and Africa and parts of the world, like the village where my grandmother was from, that didn't even have access to electricity. But that was really hard, and it was hard for me to convince donors that it was worth their time. It was a very risky idea, and I just could not find the ability to overcome these obstacles. And so I had actually almost given up for a couple of years, and then I took about $300 in paper making materials, and I, with my co-founder, went into my kitchen in my studio apartment, and we handmade a batch of fresh paper, and we took it to our local farmers market. And what happened next was something that we just could never have imagined. Simply through word of mouth, within a year, we were shipping fresh paper to farmers and families in over 35 countries. So for me, it was a really transformative moment because I started to realize that the power of this idea was not just in its ability to spread because it was so simple, but I started to realize that in today's day and age, the way you can take an idea, in my case from my local farmers market, to people all across the globe is unlike any other time in history before. And we hear this all the time, but I think for Fenugreen, we've really lived it. And I still tell stories, and Jake has heard the story about taking wheelbarrows full of fresh paper to my local post office, and then the post office having to shut down for like 2 days because we'd just been on Oprah, and then going within a couple of weeks to shipping to 35 countries using companies like UPS and Intuit and eBay and Amazon and the networks that they have. So I'm excited to be here and to kind of share more about how that happened to us and and to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Sorry, we kind of missed a handoff on the clicker, so we'll leave that slide up there while we keep going.
It says hungry.
Thank you very much. Good evening. So I want to turn next to Bryan Breckenridge, who's the executive director of Box.org. And so I know some of you may have been expecting to see Althea Erickson, who was on a previous iteration schedule. Althea had a personal issue come up, so she couldn't join us. And so Bryan, I really wanted to thank you for joining us this morning.
It's a pleasure.
Now, so technology has made it easier to go global. But there's still challenges. There's different cultures, there's complicated logistics, there's understanding and complying with regulations that differ from that in the United States. So you have what looks like a great opportunity, but then you got to figure out how to take advantage of it. If you were advising a startup about how to launch a global brand, could you describe maybe 3 or so challenges that they should be thinking about how to handle from day one?
Yeah, no doubt about it. So our founder and founders got the business Box going about 10 years ago on $10,000 or $15,000. And now there are hundreds of thousands of entities using the service all around the world. And it's been a fascinating story to see what the team's put together. I've been with the organization for about a year. And so I'm creating a global initiative within the broader framework of the company as a social entrepreneur. And Box.org is distributing the access and successful use of Box by social benefit organizations, specifically nonprofits around the world. So we're donating and discounting at Box.org. But my thoughts about markets, having sat by the people that were launching companies like Salesforce.com, where I came in early over there, and then I got in early at LinkedIn as well, and spent a lot of time with both of those two rocket ships, and now have been observing Box as a rocket ship grow as well. One, global markets can't be ignored. I mean, 7 billion consumers versus 320 million here in the US is a no-brainer. But I think that lumping all international markets into one perspective is really tough. International markets are like snowflakes. They're very different. And if you're operating whatever it is you're distributing to consumers or businesses in West Africa in the same way you're distributing to Western Europe or thinking about it, then that's going to be a challenge. That aside, I think there's 3 core challenges to consider, and I'm going to veer a little bit away from policies because that's not where I'm strongest. Though I do have one quick policy story that occurred just this morning that I think sheds light on why it's important that we do rough out some of these policies, but at that level. But the challenges really are more cultural, I think. So know that as a startup, you need to understand at some level culturally that unless your founder structure does very earnestly want to be global and not just a domestic entity, it's not going to happen. And the reason for that is because every business partner and every member of your team is going to start making micro strategies and decisions that are toward the easiest and what they know most. So you really have to, I think, cascade that cultural desire to be there. And so you have to really have kind of a gut session, a gut question, and say, are we really going to internationally expand, or are we just going to pretend and really half do it? So cultural is one. Number 2 is If you feel like you've got a product fit in one part of the world, it may not be the same product fit elsewhere. It seems totally obvious to say that, but you have to, in entering these markets, the challenge of trying to force fit a product into another market is definitely not the best answer. And to go back to your entrepreneurial roots and ask, focus group, in the new markets you head into is vital. We've seen that at all three of these businesses that I've been fortunate to be part of, from early days through maturation. And then the last is, I think there's probably three areas to really give some consideration to. It's the product pieces. So are you setting up an Uber network of drivers? Are you setting up something that needs localization? And have forethought about that as opposed to make that an afterthought. And beyond the product itself, there's also go-to-market complexity. So consider Box going into and doing its work in Japan. Japan is mostly a partner-driven ecosystem. It's an indirect ecosystem as opposed to direct sale ecosystem like in Western Europe. So even think about the channels of distribution for your product as it goes all the way through to the end user. And so those things come to mind. And then from a policy perspective and regulatory perspective, very important to think about that. If you're a social entrepreneur or a for-profit entrepreneur or anywhere in that spectrum, know that there's a very good possibility that either your supply chain or your data residency or whatever it may be is likely going to run into all kinds of hurdles, and just try and ferret those out as quickly as you can. I was over at the Beacon Lounge at the convention center on the third floor talking to Village Reach, a really neat organization distributing vaccines in really tough places 3 hours from capital cities. And the refrigeration mechanisms that they have and the software system and the data systems that overlay the distribution of these things in these villages is held up. Example is Mozambique. You have to have in-country data residence. So their data systems are not able to talk to the data stores or the data infrastructure because it's not in-country. Those are just things that you do your best, I think, to ferret those out as you're moving in to these markets.
Thank you, Bryan. And that's a good segue to Lindsey. Lindsey Grossman drives business development and strategic partnership for Intuit's QuickBook online ecosystem. She also has extensive background at the intersection of public policy and business. And so, I wanted to ask you, traditionally governments have tried to maximize the opportunity for internationally for larger companies because those have been the best able to take advantage of them. But I think we're seeing an increased focus on governments that are trying to do more to help startups, small businesses, early stage companies access global marketplace. We see that here at South by Southwest. Pritzker, Commerce Secretary Pritzker spoke yesterday at KTI, Enterprise Ireland, started Chile here. So what's your assessment of all of this? Are government policies and programs accessible to startups? Can they be more so?
Yeah, they definitely have to be. Can I get the clicker, by the way, too? Thank you. I think, first off, I would start off by saying that we all know that startups have traditionally avoided government like the plague. And you can, I can't blame them, right? Because if any of you are startups in the room, you might say, okay, government is a good place where fantastic ideas come to die very quickly. Maybe good, well-intentioned people, but they're caught up in a bad system. I'm not here to disagree with that. I've worked with governments around the world for almost 10 years, and I've definitely seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, but I'm also here to say that thankfully it's not all bad, and like you said, there's a huge opportunity, and there's governments that are doing amazing things, and so I want to kind of talk a little bit about that and how you can access those resources as a startup yourself. So first, let's talk about what the Americans are doing. I bet a lot of you in the audience are actually American startups thinking about international markets. So historically, the U.S. government has really just served big companies, right? It's what they knew. They welcomed the lobbyists into the offices in Washington, D.C. They didn't think with a startup mindset, but I'm happy to say that people like Secretary of Commerce Penny Pritzker and her team are doing a lot to really think, how can we modify our services to be ready and digested by startups? Just last year actually, Intuit worked with some folks from the Department of Commerce to have a meeting in the White House where we brought a bunch of startups, Kavita included, to say, hey, what are the pain points that we're facing as startups when we're trying to get our goods and our services into new markets overseas? And what are the processes that are just not working for us, and how can government fix that? Since then, the Secretary of Commerce has launched a new initiative called Startup Global, and the local commercial officials throughout the United States are going to be working with incubators in a couple of key cities like DC and Nashville and others to help startups think global from day one and make sure that the accelerators have the tools that they need to help their constituents as well. Also some of the other tips that I would say that startups should be using from U.S. government are ones that big companies are taking advantage already, so don't forget that. If you are wanting to enter a new country, you should definitely look at the commercial officers that are in the embassies and the consulates around the world. As an American startup, they can be really helpful to you. They can introduce you to potential new partners. If you need a lawyer in a country, they can help you find a good lawyer, all of those things. So look those folks up. The second thing that I want to talk about is what are foreign governments doing? The world is open for business, and governments want your business, so play that off of each other, right? I think one of the things that foreign governments are doing a really good job of is improving the immigration policy. So the United States, might have some challenges there of bringing the best talent, so other countries are taking advantage of that. Startup Chile, for example. There is a government-funded initiative there that's bringing top startup talent to Chile. It's giving them startup seed funding, and it's giving you access to a visa for 1 year to stay there and to create a company. The UK government also has an entrepreneurship visa. Now, there's a big debate about whether we should change the investment that's required to be able to access that visa, because a lot of startups say it's too high, but it's progress nonetheless. The other thing that I think foreign governments are doing a better job of is engaging startups at the table when they're making the policy. So the UK government recently launched an inquiry on the sharing economy. So what are companies like Airbnb, Uber, what are they doing for the economy? How many jobs are they creating? And also making sure that the laws that are in place now are modernized so they can incorporate these new types of business models. The Global Innovation Forum, which Jake runs, Intuit chairs as well, because we really think that there's a gap. Startups need to be at the table with government, and so these are some channels at which startups can to make their voice heard. The other thing that foreign governments are doing is helping their own startups get into the United States. That's a really good thing because it's going to bring us new ideas in the United States. It's going to bring us startups who are giving us a run for our money. And it's going to challenge the US mindset that exists in Silicon Valley. There's a bigger world out there. So work with these global startups. And also they will be a door for you to exit the United States and try somewhere else. The other thing that I would say too is there's a role for government in building skills. So India's Prime Minister Modi, created a new entrepreneurship ministry. He's trying to figure out how he takes all these programs across the different departments and actually makes them useful. So I think there's a lot of effort going on there. And then the other thing is it's awesome to see when governments are embracing technology themselves. You want to go create a company in Singapore, you will be up and running and registered in less than 1 hour online. There's not very many Asian countries that have that system in place. The last thing that I would say that's interesting about what foreign governments can provide you is funding. And the reason why I put this one last is because there's a big debate about whether it's government's role to pick the winners and the losers, right? Should government actually be a funder? I'd be eager to hear your point of view on that. But let's say, I think overseas, a lot of startups do see that as the role for government. A recent study of startups in Australia, 70% of them said, yes, we want government to provide seed funding. Startup Brazil, we actually have Felipe sitting in the front row who runs Startup Brazil. The Brazilian government created this initiative where they take 100 startups every year and give them $80,000 in funding, connect them to one of the top 15 accelerators in Brazil, and you can then use those government funds to hire people, right? So it's really a stimulus for employment in that country. In France, there's a program called Chômeur Créateur d'Entreprise that's actually giving you unemployment benefits for 2 years if you say you're going to go start your own company. And so there's governments are investing in this because they see this as an opportunity to grow the economy. Lastly, there's places that are doing all of these things all in one place. So in London, where I live, there's Tech City that's funded by the UK government, and it's a place where you can go find lawyers, you can go find IP experts, you can go find investors. all in a couple blocks away from each other. But that said, it's not all great. There's still a lot of things that are wrong with policy, like Bryan was talking about. By the way, you have an opportunity in Mozambique, it sounds like. They don't have refrigerator systems, so you better get fresh paper in there.
We are.
Okay. But I would say this is a huge opportunity for companies. So where there are gaps, what are some of the tools? So immigration, you need to hire folks in a different country. Although as a startup, you might not be ready to take them on full time, so Elance and Odesk are providing huge opportunities, especially for people in remote areas, to actually be employed. One of our QuickBooks customers in Australia has a personal assistant based in Georgia. She actually has a disability. She's blind, and so she's able to do a lot of these things with tools that she has in her home. So it's really awesome to see these platforms. Shipping and customs. It's an awful experience, and talk to Kavita afterwards if you want to learn more. But there are companies like BigCommerce, UPS, and Ship who are trying to improve the end-to-end life cycle of getting your goods across borders. Huge opportunities with data and privacy. I could talk all day about this. Governments have to get this right, because without data to delight customers, startups will not be able to grow and to make sense and to make better business decisions. And then also managing your money. It's so difficult to put money across borders. Banks have huge fees. There's not regulations to stop this type of behavior. So I think other companies like TransferWise and payments companies like Stripe are taking advantage of that to make it easier for small businesses and startups to do that. You have to make sure you have the right compliance products working in these different countries as well. So we're trying to do that with QuickBooks Online as well, to make sure that you're global ready and able to operate on the cloud. So in closing, I would just say we should feel positive. There's lots of good stuff that's happening in government, but we can't take our foot off the pedal. Startups need to be at the table with government, making sure that we're making progress on some of these key issues. Thank you.
So I was going to ask one follow-up question, but then I was going to turn it over, just open up the discussion. So I hope you get your questions ready. There's a microphone there. If you want to ask a question, please stand up and identify yourself, and let us know who the question is directed to. But the one follow-up question to you all is I wanted to focus a little bit more on public policy, which Lindsey spent most of her time talking about. But when you see stories in the news today, Edward Snowden, right to be forgotten in Europe, China squeezing technology, foreign technology brands. It seems like there are a lot of ways that governments can challenge your success overseas. So could you identify, are there any policies on the horizon that are making you nervous, or maybe Kavita from a business perspective that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis that could be made better?
Sure. Well, I know that Lindsey and Bryan probably have more on the policy perspective, but I'll tell you what intimidated me when I was first starting out. And I think it's exactly how Jake just touched upon. I was terrified that I didn't know what I didn't know. And I think for me, it seemed at first so simple. The first time I put my product online, I was amazed when somebody in Delaware bought it, because I was like, oh my gosh, until now I've been walking down the street and going to the farmer's market, and now I can go to the post office and ship it as far as California. And then I think almost by accident, we enabled international shipping on our website. And we started to get all these orders from the UK and then Spain and France. And at first I thought, oh gosh, well, we'll just have to refund their money. But these people were really excited. And so, we went to the post office and we figured it out. But Jake, it took a lot of work. And I've told Jake the story a lot. Each international order in the beginning would take us 20, 25 minutes to do the paperwork. And then half of them wouldn't even make it. So in the beginning, it took me a little while before I realized we were losing significant amounts of money on our international orders. But we didn't even realize that at first, but we were so excited because having customers internationally, for me personally, was a really big deal, because I had tried to get this product out there in so many different ways. And the idea now that we could actually get it to places like Haiti and Malawi and India through our local post office was incredible. But once we started to use some of the tools that exist out there for entrepreneurs, simply like UPS Mail Innovations, we were actually able to make the process a lot more efficient. And for me, I think, what I've really realized is that going global for us was an accident, but I share my story because to me before it seemed impossible. And now I've realized that it is possible. Not only was it possible for us, but it took our social enterprise to places that we could have never accessed on our own, because all of a sudden people all over the world that were excited about this product could share it with others and show it to others. And I on my own could have never gotten this into the hands of women in Haiti who were entrepreneurs that ran a small catering business in 8 months, but somebody else did. And I think that's what we realized is, once you can put your idea out there and try to figure out the bureaucracy as much as you can, or go to the big companies like Intuit that do that, because that's what they're really good at, you can unleash the power of your ideas, especially those of you that have digital startups. I mean, it just amazes me to think about what you could do with the click of a button.
Yeah, and I would just touch on that briefly to state that if your service or your offering, your products are focused, more in the profit vein and in the profit plus benefit or benefit vein, consider spending time around those that are focused on the benefit side of that. And believe it or not, even the 1.6 million legally articulated 501c3 nonprofits that are based in the U.S. have pretty significant global reach, and there's some policy areas that nonprofits with their status are gonna be able to streamline that you wouldn't be able to with your LLC or C corp. And so finding strategic market partners on the nonprofit side of the aisle is likely a really important thing to consider, especially with the World Visions of the world. In the older guard, you have operations everywhere, the Oxfams or the World Banks. They have a financial product, all of which are fortunately using technologies like ours at Box to collaborate globally. But I would definitely consider those partnerships, because they're going to take policy on maybe a different way than a lot of other for-profit entities are. I mean, even look at Kiva or SAMA, the SAMA family of organizations. With Kiva, I mean, they're nurturing the success of entrepreneurs in every corner of the world, but it's the banking systems that overlay that nonprofit infrastructure that's really positive. And then the second piece I would mention is, as I sit now as executive director of Box.org, I'm hungry, even though I'm still an initiative within the for-profit company, now public, awesome company Box, but I'm looking for nonprofit and for-profit partnerships to help us globalize as well. Because everybody, I think, especially in the corporate world, the larger corporate world, is looking for entrepreneurial partners or social benefit or social entrepreneurs, or just small business entrepreneurs, to bring a lot of the programming to the next level. So find partners that are as hungry to work with you as you are to work with them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just second that on the partnership piece. In addition to helping you get to market, partners can also help you navigate the local regulatory issues, right? So Intuit partners a lot with other people or other companies in new markets. We can't do it alone, right? And so I would definitely just second that as a way to navigate those. When I think of like one of the big policy issues that makes me worried about startup growth and growth in the innovation sector, I do come back to this whole data issue, because without data and the ability to make use of it, to delight your customers, and to be able to share data across borders, and to really have a global mindset when it comes to data and analytics, without those things, majority of startups will fail. Because if you can't have access to the data to make a better business decision, to find out where your customers are coming from, to decide where you go next, it's going to be a big problem. And I think this is something that actually Secretary Pritzker said yesterday. She's worried because what countries are doing, they are creating trade barriers in the name of privacy. They are forcing data localization, and in other countries, using important and real things like consumer safety as a rationale, but they're looking at it a way to actually create walls around their countries. And so we need to make sure that there's a balance between smart protection for citizens and their data and right to privacy, but also still enough space to innovate at the same time and to grow. So that's an issue, I think, where Global Innovation Forum is working on. I think a lot of the startups in the financial, in the fintech world actually really understand the importance of data, so I'm glad to see them out there shaping. Actually, there's a new initiative in the UK. I mentioned this before. Right now, banks are charging you to take your data to other platforms, right? And the UK government is considering mandating all big banks to have force them to have an API system, so that startups, fintech startups, companies like Intuit, QuickBooks, etc., can leverage that banking data and make sense of it and help you grow and make better business decisions and better financial decisions. So it's an interesting debate, but at the end of the day, data has become a commodity, and we have to make sure that startups and the innovation sector are talking to government about this issue.
So I started a company with the world in mind. E-commerce, sales tax, global. The rules seem to be changing constantly. U.S. states have different rules. EU countries have different rules. Are there tools out there, companies that can help keep me out of my life?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to have the compliance tools, and like you said, it changes between states, the United States. So on sales tax, that's a really interesting one. There's two companies called Exactor and Avalara that are helping small businesses and retailers figure out, like, what do I need to charge from a local tax perspective. When it comes to doing your taxes in other countries, this is where I highly recommend getting an accountant. Actually, I think it was on my last slide. Make sure you have an accountant who understands international law, understands international compliance, and make sure you have the tools that are relevant as well there, because that stuff is not easy. There's payments companies I think are interesting. PayPal and Stripe are really good at understanding like what you need to do there. Some of the e-commerce platforms like Etsy and also eBay are getting smarter about making sure that they're guiding you as a user to apply the right taxes. But customs around shipping and stuff, all that becomes a very good nightmare. So I don't have any good recommendations other than some of the big shipping companies, but it's hard to have it all in one place. So in short, I feel your pain, and maybe there's a startup idea there.
This is a really big deal for companies like Etsy, because the European Union just started requiring sellers in the United States to collect VAT, and requiring the Etsy or platforms to make sure that that's being done. So they're kind of hammering an intermediary there to try to achieve a public policy objective. So I suspect given that, I know Etsy's looking at that, I know eBay's looking at it, but there will be more tools coming up to try to address the problem. Did you guys want anything else on best practices?
That's all you guys.
I think Lindsey covered some good tools. I know for us, we use Shopify and BigCommerce. We also use Google a lot, and as silly as that might sound, we found that there's almost any question that we might have, someone out there has tried to do it before. And I think what I've also been amazed by is that big companies, and I'm sure Lindsey can talk about this, often have the bandwidth to handle those small inquiries. So if you reach out to them, or if you come to them with these challenges, more often than not, we found them to be very helpful. I know that UPS has really kind of held our hands sometimes through the whole shipping global process. And I think when I was myself dragging wheelbarrows of fresh paper to the local post office, it didn't even occur to me that companies at large might be willing and able to assist us. So that's
really
all I would
good
suggest
point.
Is just reach out. You never know.
Yeah, that's a huge point. So Intuit has a public policy team, one of which is sitting in the front row, a team that I used to work on as well. All these companies are engaging at the seat of government all the time, and we would be more than happy to understand the issues that our customers face. That's why we do a lot of advocacy work with our customers, but a ton of other companies out there will have.
That's how we met.
Yeah, that's how we met. We'll have lawyers in-house who could walk you through. It might not be as easily consumable on their blog or anything, but try to get a hold of those people because they generally know what they're doing. So.
I just wanted to add something, because we are internationalizing at the moment in e-commerce especially, and we're having a software as a service, and we're using Fostering as a payment provider to help us to deal with all the different tax collection issues when you have clients in all different countries. And they are organizing it, and basically clients are closing contracts with Fostering, and they're organizing everything with the tax collection, so we don't have to worry about that. They have the rules for all different countries and create localized contracts with them, although it's the one online platform we offer. So that's a helpful tool.
What's the name of it again? Can you say?
Fostering.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, I'm David Bryan, CEO and founder of Learngo.com, and we also started out accidentally as a world company, and next thing you know, it's about the commodity of knowledge, people exchanging. For instance, I'll teach you how to do programming if you teach me how to graphic design. And so people kind of brought each other, but we didn't expect to go international so soon. Now we have users in over 200 countries. There's been a kind of a pushback with the folks that are involved with this. Some of them say we shouldn't include the emerging markets. I disagree. And I wanted to see how you all feel about that. Having said that, one of our challenges has been that we had to sort of ban the whole country because there were some folks in there that were pretty good at what they do, let's just say. So we do kind of trade off there. But how do you all feel about including everything, the emerging markets? This is the general question for any of you. I feel like it's an investment. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll take it quickly just because a colleague of mine, Deepak, who has been helping Vox decide where to prioritize markets, and I were talking about this. And I think that the trade-off that you need to really start thinking about is level of complexity to interplace regulatory, professional, go-to-market, product, et cetera, with the market opportunity. And that the math between the prioritization math that happens with those two things in mind is what's most important for you to distill as a decision-making team. The complexity, if it's going to override, if it's worth, we always say sometimes the best things are worth fighting for, right? And so maybe the lower hanging fruit is enough and make your focus and eligibility, if you're offering something that requires eligibility as an example, more constrictive. But I think it's distilling right in that area of math that's important to think about, complexity versus market opportunity. Yeah. That's a sweeping statement. That doesn't get you too far resource-wise, but maybe it makes you think and focus your thoughts.
So speaking to the level of complexity, and especially since you seem to have some experience in the EU, several of those countries have started initiatives on a national level for entrepreneurship. But then you add the level of complexity of the EU regulations. So can you speak to how complex are we talking?
Yeah, actually. So yes, ideally the EU is meant to make these things easier, right? That you could go into one of the member states and then, go to all of them at the same time. But it's not been so easy. A couple months ago, we did a similar discussion, and Jake referenced this company, a company called Sugro. They're based out of East London. They're a really innovative product company, probably in the home fix-it world. They make this sticky stuff that you can attach to anything and, fix your phone and all these things. And so they sell their products in things like Home Depot equivalents throughout Europe. And the problem that she was talking about was the language restriction. So on her packaging, right, it's like little sticky tack basically, right? And so there's a lot of languages in Europe, and you want to be able to be resonant so that on the shelf people pick up your product. But she was trying to figure out, how do I comply with the environmental regulations of my packaging that the EU requires? How do I get all of 5 languages that I need to get on here? And so she said it's been really difficult. That said, I know people who've benefited from grants that have come out of the EU as well, right? So I don't have an easy answer, but you really have to think through it when you go there. Back to the emerging market question. I totally agree with what Bryan said. It's an equation that you have to weigh, pros and cons. I've had the privilege and the joy of working in places like India, which are extremely complex across multiple states. But I would say you don't have to go with an all or nothing approach to emerging markets. You can actually test, right? So especially if you're going to have an online product, there's ways to test demand before you actually go and invest in the local compliance steps that you need to take to launch in a place like India or any other market. So I would just really encourage you to experiment with emerging markets and then talk to people locally. Don't send your team there if they've never had experience. Make sure you hire someone locally or hire a contractor, even if you're not sure if you're going to invest in that country yet, but it's worth getting the local expertise.
Yeah, well, I think there's another question, so we can...
Just related to that. You know what, just maybe one thing to add on the emerging markets to what Bryan was saying. When you talk about the cost-benefit analysis, I would just put a couple of things under the costs. And so if you're looking at emerging markets, there are a couple of things that become more difficult that you have to assess whether or not you really want to deal with. Intellectual property rights protection is one of them. Payments. We had this wonderful story. We did an event at Living Social last year where someone from Living Social talked about their experiment going into Indonesia where most people don't use credit cards. And so they had to set up this elaborate cash-on-delivery system, and they hired a bunch of people on mopeds to physically pick up a payment from the people that were buying living social vouchers online. Dealing with customs regulations. The story that I told before about technology will save us was a story about the United States. And so you can imagine that dealing with U.S. customs is difficult. What is dealing with customs going to be like when we get to less developed markets? Then just generally transparency and the ability to understand and comply with regulations, particularly if they're not in your language. And then more general sort of language and distance barriers and cultural barriers that can exist. So,
and even HR policy as well for employment, if you're employing teams. Those are things there's lots of gotchas there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
sorry.
Good morning. I guess good afternoon now. Talk to us a little bit, maybe in relationship to the complexity issue about the indirect model and collaboration. You all seem to be suggesting the direct model and kind of do it yourself. And we have all these tools now, which is terrific. Talk to us about your experiences with indirect models and how that might help startups.
Yeah, that's a good question. We've had Intuit's actually had it, not a lot of people know this, but we've had an indirect model in a couple places like South Africa, where we've sold QuickBooks through a distributor. And it's a great way to get your brand out. We did it in Australia actually before we launched. I'll tell you the complexity though. It's a great way to understand demand and understand what your marketplace can look like. But the complexity is when you want to make that shift of going from a channels partner to actually going direct. Because sometimes you lose control of your brand, right? And that's really dangerous in emerging markets. It was less dangerous for us in a place like Australia, but it can be really interesting in other kind of less transparent marketplaces. So I think it's great to experiment with. Just, my mother told me this, choose your partner wisely, right? So make sure you understand their reputation and test before you go. Yeah, does that help? Yeah.
Yeah, that's been our experience recently too, as the partners in Japan helping Box become, more household name in Japan and Sydney as well, in those markets. Like it's partners first, make them successful, go in with them, and then do your best to maintain the integrity of the brand as best you can, and equip them to be as successful as your teams would be at scale.
Kavita, you experienced that?
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting for us because when we first started, we always thought that we would go international through distributors. And to me, that seemed like the best way to do it because, as Lindsey was saying, we were very concerned about our brand. And, one of the things I was going to mention when we were talking about emerging markets is, of course, when you have a patented proprietary consumer product like we do, one of our biggest concerns always is IP. And also, something that people are putting in with their food, how do you manage the regulations for that, the food safety? I mean, it's a whole different ballgame to be a consumer product, and then to have a food product is incredibly complex. And so in the beginning, I always thought that we've got to go in only through distributors. The interesting thing was no one wanted to distribute this. We could not, we would reach out to people, we would go to conferences. Lindsey and I met at this global conference in England where Richard Branson talked about fresh paper, and still we could not find any legitimate partners. We found plenty of people who wanted to distribute it, who had probably never distributed anything before. But
I wanted to distribute it.
And I would have let you. But we found plenty of people that we could not trust, that, we just, the people that we would have wanted to distribute the product and the brands that we felt like we could trust had no interest. So interestingly for us, going direct to consumer and showing that there was a market there, and then getting all of the press that came out. I think we skipped that slide, but the international press for us actually got us in front of the distributors that would pay attention. And today I would say distributors are a huge part of our international strategy. They've protected our brand, they've taken our brand to emerging markets, they've helped us partner with NGOs that are doing work, working with farmers in India and Africa and places that we can't access right now. But I think, for us, that was the only way to sort of get it out there. And I think for us, what's also interesting, this is a little bit off topic, but going global actually got the attention of retailers in the U.S. because for a long time, it was the same way. We couldn't get retailers in the U.S. other than Whole Foods, which was our first partner. We couldn't get mainstream retailers to care about this. We couldn't get people to think that consumers would pay money to buy a product that would help us give it away to people in need all across the globe. And now we're launching in Bed Bath & Beyond and Crate & Barrel and Williams-Sonoma and all these retailers that you couldn't even imagine because they went and looked at all of the international demand and said, oh my gosh, this went global and we missed it. So, so I think for us, that was really interesting, and that's what I try to tell startups: is it doesn't matter how small you are, if you have a product that could be used by people anywhere. Think about those people, because you don't know how that's going to impact your brand and your business today. You don't know how it's going to impact your brand and your business in the United States, and you may not even know your biggest market may be France. When you're just starting out, it's too early to know. So just
savor
try it
the
all.
surprise. That's what I was saying about experimenting. Intuit's doing that right now. Is like, you don't know what you don't know, and so with everything being online, it's so easy to experiment. So it's a really good point.
Yep, frame every rejection letter. Be ready to resurface those later.
Right. So I'm Colvin from California. Thank you guys for the insights so far. Super interesting. So I guess my question is more of a personal one. Do you feel like the glass is half empty or half full on the matter of global markets? And are we inevitably going towards a full global market? Or can government and other agencies kind of continue to prevent that, and especially see people start keeping back to? Are we getting there, or is it going to happen anyway? How do you feel about this going forward?
My glass is empty and I'm thirsty, so that's what I'll say. It's actually, for me, it's really half full, because, thank you. It is really half full. You have to be global from day one. Period. If you are not global from day one, other people will be global from day one, and your competition will be in your backyard before you know it. So I don't really think it's an if. It's probably a win. I think the big challenge for a startup is like, when do I go global? Like, I want to build a prototype. I live in, let's say, Denmark, or I live in the United States. I think there's a need in my own country, but I don't know if there's a need somewhere else. So like, how do you start experimenting and do that in a rapid kind of way? But I definitely think it's half full. We have to get out global. I think government is starting to wake up, right? But we have to be loud, we have to shout, we have to use platforms to explain what these ridiculous laws mean to our day-to-day when we're trying to get a package out the door. We have to be vocal on those things. But I definitely think it's an awesome opportunity. And it also gives us an opportunity to grow as human beings. Like, my life is infinitely better because I've worked in different countries. My life is infinitely better because I've met friends and family around the world, because I've tried to figure out how can a company or what I'm doing be successful in another place. So I think it's personally rewarding as well as professionally.
I think for me right now, the glass really always feels like it's half full, because for such a long time, I never thought that I would get my idea out there, ever. And like many entrepreneurs, and especially like many young women, for years I remember hearing people say things like, you need more money, you need more experience, you need more degrees. And for a long time I felt like I was not enough, and that I didn't have enough to ever take this idea out there. So to me, I think the power of seeing what happens when something that you've created gets into the hands of people all over the world that you've never met, that you can't even access. I think all of the other things, the bureaucracy, the other regulatory issues, those kind of don't feel like as big of a deal. Because to me, it still amazes me. Every morning when I wake up and I hear the countries that we're shipping to, or that we've suddenly signed on a retailer in Australia or New Zealand, it's incredible. I never thought that is where we would be. So I think it's absolutely half full, and I encourage everyone to at least consider the global customer, even when you're designing your products, because it changes everything.
Yeah, no doubt. I think there's much more a tailwind than a headwind in globalizing, what we're doing. And I see it now when I see nonprofits signing up for Box.org's program, that are sort of, the word of mouth is out there, and it's proliferating in that way. I saw that at LinkedIn as a part of that business, watching that global economic graph expand, and just seeing professionals and entrepreneurs coming on and bringing their colleagues and supply chains onto that social network. That to me was very encouraging, and I do think that the network effect that the internet has fostered is also now bringing with it some regulatory awareness. And you're seeing some real progressive moves for the White House to have a chief data scientist now for the first time is very encouraging. And you can bet lots of folks who've made their rounds through DC know that the world isn't just in this continental 48 plus 2. So tailwind and half full.
Yeah. The other thing I just want to say is, like, there's some really amazing communities out there in these different countries, and that can connect you to other places. So like London, for example, where I live I believe is the fintech capital of the world, right? But you go there and the startup world is so interesting because it's a lot smaller, right? So it's not like massive South by Southwest. It's not like, being in San Francisco. It's smaller, people have reputations that they need to take care of because it is smaller, so they're really nice. They're willing to help you. And because London is basically a really great door to the rest of Europe, you meet two people at an event and instantly you have 5 contacts in like 10 other countries, right? So I would say it might seem scary, but ask all the people in the room. We'll put you in touch with these people in these countries because one person can really unlock a new marketplace for you, and people are willing to help. So, I think we've got Brazil, we've got an Italian in the front row. I mean, I would be really interested to know how many countries are in this room right now, but that's what I would say about the connections.
I would just say too that I think it depends, right? I mean, I think what we're moving to is a world where you have a large group of connected countries that want to run really fast and where you're going to be able to engage between those countries. But that there are some that are kind of taking themselves out of the game. Russia, for instance, Brazil's proposed some strange things. Argentina has sort of limited access to the global marketplace. And so, I mean, Kavita, I suspect you've done business and you've sold to customers in Chile, but not in Cuba. And if you look at the way that the growth trajectory for Chile, it's been influenced by a whole set of market-oriented policies, free trade agreements, open internet policies, engagement in the global marketplace. If you look at Cuba, it's Soviet-era state-run economy that doesn't have internet access widely, and that doesn't permit engagement in the global economy to a great extent. And so, I think it's not uniform wherever you go. And I do think that there are countries like Chile, both in the developing world, that are looking to integrate themselves more together through trade agreements, through just national policies. So that's where most of the business is going.
But unfortunately, fruit is spoiling in refrigerators globally, including mine. I'm going to check.
I wanted to add, because of what Grossman was saying, and I think it's a nice idea to actually connect. I myself live in Indonesia. I work in the e-commerce area, and I do international business development and strategic partnerships in Latin America and Asia Pacific area. I was born in Germany, and that's where the company is from. So if anyone wants to know about complexity in emerging markets or how to go into an indirect distribution model in Chile, that's also I'm very open for questions about that because I do this also. My name is Juliana Mendes. So if you want to connect, the company we're working for is AX Semantics. It's an e-commerce software, and I really would love to know if anyone else could also support what we're doing because we're now trying to step into the US market and see what we can do here and how we can find partners. Or Brazil, that's one of our next steps also. So it'll be very interesting if you have any tips.
Thanks for that. My name is Shukla, and I'm from Europe, but I live in New York, and I help companies actually with realizing business in relation to the U.S. or like executing stuff. So that would be great. Actually, I do have another question to you guys. So I have a VC background, and before I did some other things in different fields, and we always try to relate to the U.S. somehow. Interestingly, my company or the company I was working for was active internationally, like growth markets and everywhere, but not in the U.S., which first makes sense. You don't want to be just the next investor in the U.S. Next to all these other ones. However, I found I figured that it actually would make sense for U.S. companies to look like overseas, because what happens is that we, for example, saw in Germany is let's say if you're an online startup or a digital startup, what happens with all those copycat structures? Most of the great startups start to originate from the U.S. and then actually you feel there's demand in those foreign countries, and I think you should look abroad and look to these other markets, because if you don't serve them, somebody else will do, and somebody else will take this market share. And my personal advice would be, Or like, that would be also my question to you guys. How did you start? Did you talk to lawyers? Did you go to the embassies? Or who did you start talking to? Is there someone really, because we're also concerned about your brand, your CI maybe, if you start working with distributors and so on. I believe that if there are like fans of your brand and customers, they might be a good first person to start talking to. And coming from the startup field, actually going into another market, some of us like starting a new venture from scratch to or can be, so that can be a model to build another European team or French team to start a business with. What's your take on it? Like, how would you start? Who would you start talking to it? Yeah, what's your model of that?
I think there's just really quick strokes on this. It's nurturing the demand that you see all over the place, but then being really strategic about where you truly launch and set up resources and expand and formalize relationships. But do your best early days, especially while you're failing fast and doing a lot of things to nurture the demand. Like I said, nurture your fans where they are, and the regulatory hurdles and things they'll help you leap over those if they're devoted enough to what it is you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would echo that. The one thing that we did that now I look back I think was really useful for us is as we started to see online demand in different countries, just like Bryan was saying, we were based in Boston at the time, and we would just go reach out. We literally would walk down the street and knock on the door of like the Swiss consulate, and we went to UK Trade and Investment, and that was actually really interesting. Not only were they super willing to help, but later they were willing to connect us to retailers like Tesco, which is one of the biggest retailers. We connected with YEI, which is the Young Entrepreneurs Initiative from France, in the same way. And most countries in Europe, I know Chile has a great program as well. I mean, worldwide, there are countries that want to do business with startups in the US and that want us to bring our products there and vice versa. So just go look for the resources, I think, when you start to see demand and try to think about how you can be a little more strategic and get some help without spending a lot of money on consultants and distributors at first.
Yeah, we also talk to partners who are doing similar space, right? So QuickBooks is an accounting platform, and we do things like payments and payroll, right? Pretty compliance driven. But in other countries, we have to have partners who know the compliance environment, better than we do in the day one, right? So in the UK, we've partnered. We have new partners called Go Cardless, which is a payments partner. There's really interesting like B2B startups that are happening around the world. So we learned a lot about the new markets by talking to people who eventually became our partners, right? And then we do this thing called Follow Me Homes. It sounds kind of creepy, but we actually follow our customers to their place of business, and we observe them, and we invest in those a lot of places. We are doing them in countries where we haven't launched yet, just to understand, here are the needs of a small business owner in Indonesia. Is that similar to the needs of a German small business owner, right? Follow your customers and then go meet partners and learn from them.
So why don't we take these last two questions? I think it's 10 to 1:30, right? We're running out of time.
Thank you, panel, for a great panel and discussion. We were just about to mention that, first of all, my name is Larry Tabaj. I work for the U.S. Department of Commerce here in Austin, Texas, and I just wanted to let everyone know here in the audience, the U.S. Commercial Service of the U.S. Department of Commerce actually helps companies go global. We used to focus on what we call export ready, meaning you're selling here in the U.S. and maybe you're selling in Canada to Mexico, and you really want to explore Europe, Latin America, or Africa. Now we're actually targeting startups as well. We want to be right there, right from the beginning, tell you, how to go international, what to do with e-commerce, how to think about taxes in Canada versus Mexico versus Brazil versus Japan. So we have 100 offices in the U.S., so you can locate us by going on export.com, find your local U.S. Export Assistance Center, and reach out to them, and they'll assign you trade specialists. And then what makes us unique is we're in 80 countries right now, so we have offices in embassies and consulates. Again, use your tax dollars and
They're really helpful. I use them for big companies and use them for startups. I go talk to them. Their whole job is to help companies expand. So, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paolo. I'm the founder of the Technology Group. We help companies understand how the culture and business with them. I wanted to piggyback on the half full glass. We understand from the sources that in the probably next 5 years there will be seems to me like it's not absolutely allowed to speak. So, think about that. And the other thing is, feeling that many people want to connect, why don't we use the hashtag global MKTS, and anyone wants to actually say, I was at the conference or at this session, I want to connect. And last thing, I'm mentioning here Southwestern world. I think I have one spot left on internationalization. So check it out if you're interested, and thank you so much.
We would have said use the hashtag global markets in the Southwest and the characters that you put in the hashtag. So final comment question, and then also we'll be hanging around afterwards, and so feel free to come talk with us.
Just a comment here, I'm sure. My name is James Srinivasan. I'm an independent investor. I have some investments in India, e-commerce, and music and some social enterprise. One comment I want to make is we've actually found more success always looking for partners and consultants. It's actually looking for acquisitions. We actually were able to find some really good partners because everybody is in need of money, and there's some companies that have phenomenal know-how. They make mistakes, they make losses, and they put that to use, and they're much more motivated than we do because they're on the board or whatever. So I just wanted to say that's a really, untapped way to produce.
Yeah, absolutely. Intuit's looking overseas for acquisitions more than we ever have before. There's some amazing companies out there. So thanks for raising that.
Any last words?
Yeah, we're honored to be part of this box. Thanks for letting us share some thoughts today.
Please join me in thanking our panel.